Assembling a party. How aware is each member of the objective of the party? Full awareness. Each one of them knows the tales of power pertinent to their specialty, and they know that their function is part of a purpose that transcends them. The relationship between the rule and the party is expressed in their tasks. For example, when the female warriors of a group receive the command of tracking energy in space until they find possible candidates for a new generation of sorcerers, they concentrate on the task as their avenue to freedom. They're not interested in anything else. If the discipline of that intent cracks, the result can be chaotic. He gave me an example of the effect of a personal concern slipped inside a sorcerer's task. Soon after I started my apprenticeship, and although nobody asked me to do it, I offered to help Don Juan establish the new party. Every time a beautiful girl paid attention to me, I saw in her my complementary, energetic being and tried to sell her to Don Juan, eulogizing her qualities. At first, the warriors took it as a joke, but little by little they got pissed off. And one day when I brought my new Nagual woman to introduce to them, I couldn't find them. They had all moved out of the house. To feel lonely helped me to recover my sobriety. The party is a self-conscious being that overcomes us thoroughly. To participate in its intent is something so exceptional that as soon as an apprentice glimpses its totality, his ego position just melts. That does not imply that he automatically becomes impeccable. For years, he will still have to make an effort to temper his character and to extinguish his self-importance, as well as the obsession of power. Only the Nagual man and woman have a total vision of the functioning of the party. Continuing the analogy, they would tell you that they are the nerve cells of the party, the units which direct the process of perpetuation. The other members serve as support, and they carry out the concrete tasks of duplicating the group. The work of the Nagual is exhausting. He has to have perfect control of the arts of stalking and dreaming. He has to learn to see and to develop his capacity of manipulation to the maximum. And he has to serve as an example of sobriety in order to maintain the cohesion of the group. If they are allowed to be carried away by their emotions, the result is disintegration. I asked him why. Because the party is an organism of critical mass. If any one of its components goes astray from the goal, the resulting dysfunction causes a collapse, and everything would have to be restarted. That is why the Nagual is obliged to demand from his warriors that they give all of themselves, and he must distribute their tasks so that all of them can participate with optimism and trust. The oil of the party is the impeccability of its members, and its fuel the yearning for total freedom. The structure of the party. How many warriors make up a group? The normal structure of a party is quadripartite, that is, based on the number 4, since the rule has a pyramid form. Its formation and growth are carried out in accordance with that basic structure. As in the pyramids, the architecture of the group consists of a base with 4 corners, each corner made up of 3 warriors, 1 female dreamer, 1 female stalker, and 1 male assistant. The corners are connected to each other through messengers, and the Nagual couple is above them all. The rule manifests itself to a double man or woman by means of a vision, and they have to accept it to be considered Naguals. Following that acceptance, the Naguals are joined by their warriors little by little, always following the signs of the spirit. Their capacity to lead is natural and indisputable, because being double, they reflect each one of the energetic types in their party. Naguals can be defined as a man and a woman of extraordinary energy, involved in an act of fertilization of an infinitely greater scope than anything within human recognition. As long as they remain together, they are usually presented in society as husband and wife. The ability of the Nagual man is to find and use the most appropriate words to express things with accuracy, intellectual clarity, fluency, and beauty. Among seers of the lineage which Don Juan's group belonged to, the omen to occupy this position was to be dying. All their leaders, except me, were found under such conditions. Why was your case different? Because properly speaking, I am a surplus Nagual. I didn't come to continue the lineage, but to seal it. And what is the rule for the Nagual woman? The Nagual woman is the light that guides all effort, the true mother. Normally she leaves before the rest of the group and stays fluctuating between the first and the second attention, visiting the apprentices in dreams. She functions as a lighthouse, and if necessary, she can return from the second attention to sow a new generation of seers. When it comes to warriors, they come in two bands, stalkers and dreamers. They have two kinds of functions, portals and guardians. The portals belong to the direction of the south. They are the strainer or filter through which apprentices must pass. They determine whether a warrior stays or leaves, and they have the main influence on how members of the team are provided. They are also the organizers of power meetings. The guardians are kind of an external version of the portals. There is a white one and a black one. They are in charge of watching over the smooth functioning of the group, which means they are alert to possible external attacks, and they also stand ready to solve any internal problems. Among the new seers, women are in charge of all these functions. Why is that? Because women have greater mobility and more energy than men. Practically the entire universe is feminine by nature, and teams of witches travel through it as if they were at home in their own house. That capacity to circulate without interference from the dark energy makes them the battery of the group. On the other hand, we men are detected at once because our energy is bright and betrays us. Also, since we were not made to give birth, we do not have a specialized organ for dreaming. Except for the Nagual, the male elements of a party don't carry much sparkle. Nevertheless, the rule dictates that there are 4 male warriors dedicated to organize, explore, and understand. For this purpose, they fix their assemblage points in very specific energetic locations. Their presence serves to stabilize the group, neutralizing the frequent explosions of power staged by the female warriors. If not for them, the structure would explode as soon as the woman achieves some degree of efficiency. So, the men function as anchors. They fix the group until a maximum of power is reached. Due to its form, Don Juan called the party the organization of the snake. It is a concept that he inherited from the old Seers, referring to the pattern of squares on the skin of the rattlesnake. He affirmed that the head of the animal, with its fixed and hypnotic eyes, represent the Nagual couple. The chest corresponds to the warrior dreamers, whose function is to inhale visions and distribute them to the whole group. The stomach represents the stalkers, able to digest any conceivable situation. The tail is the assistants, who are in charge of giving mobility to the group. It is a very fluid disposition. Are there any parties which are organized differently? The warriors are largely the result of the implacable manipulation of the Nagual. I'm sure you can see how, after years under this constant pressure, the form of a group, including the particular hue adopted by the luminosity of each member, becomes very specific. This is why so many lineages of sorcerers exist. But all of them have, basically, the same kind of pyramid-shaped parties, which I have described to you, since experience has shown that this is the most stable formula. The purpose of the rule. What is the purpose of a party? From the eagle's point of view, to explore, to verify, and to expand the rule. Each generation of warriors should leave their print on it, because the rule is accumulative. The heritage of the lineage consists of a series of positions of the assemblage point, to which successive parties go adding their own acquisitions. It is normal that lineages make a journal of incidents, where the Naguals note their discoveries. The basic interest of an organism is to reproduce itself. Therefore, one way of defining it would be to say that the rule is the recipe for a reproductive process. What it seeks is the perpetuation of awareness, something which, beyond a certain point, cannot be accomplished through individual channels. The resources that each warrior personally acquires during his training are secondary achievements. From the sorcerer's point of view, the object of grouping themselves is to ensure their passage to another level of attention, since without energy mass, there is no flight. Do you mean that solitary warriors don't have a chance? No. What I'm saying is that a party can go further. Imagine that you live in a colony of gregarious caterpillars who are in a state of metamorphosis. Suddenly, one of the cocoons breaks open, and its resident leaves in a momentary explosion of light and color. The sensation you're left with is that the caterpillar disappeared. For the caterpillar itself, on the other hand, its true life as a butterfly will have begun. Now then, a solitary caterpillar is more likely to end up in the stomach of a bird. In the same way, the ulterior objective of warriors is the definitive jump to the third attention, the liberation from all forms of interpretation. The quantity of energy that is necessary for this can only be achieved by means of a special consensus of critical mass in order to generate the necessary agreements to compact the energy. However, since many parties are not able to reach the completion of their energy, Naguals have built an inhabitable oasis inside the second attention, an enormous edifice of intent in a remote region of dreaming, where seers go alone or in small groups. I call it the dome of intent, because its visible form is dome-shaped, but Don Juan preferred to call it the cemetery of the Naguals. Why did he call it that? Because staying in that space to live implies the sorcerer's literal death. In a sense not at all allegorical, it is a cemetery. Although those who choose that destiny have achieved the expansion of awareness for an enormous period of time, They will have to do without it when the moment arrives. So, for many sorcerers, the immediate goal of the party is the dome of the Naguals, in the hope of being able to use it as a transit port where they can accumulate provisions for a great expedition. To get there, it is not necessary that the whole group leave at the same time. Sometimes, warriors choose to go one by one. In that case, they can partially return, as long as the totality of the group's energetic structure has not been completed. As you can see, the challenges warriors are involved in during their human existence are barely the prelude. The really tremendous stuff comes later. Don't ask what they dedicate themselves to while they remain in that world. It would sound like a fairy tale to you. The important thing is, all their activities are governed by the rule. I commented that, keeping in mind the goal of the party, the rule could be interpreted as the pre-Hispanic equivalent of what other cultures called divine laws. That is, a group of normative regulations designed for man's salvation. He replied, "It is not the same, because it does not come from a supreme being. The mechanism of the rule is impersonal. It lacks kindness or compassion. It has no other objective than its own continuity." Allowing themselves to be seduced by the analogies, the ancient seers made the error of identifying the rule with their particular interpretations, and wound up worshiping it and erecting temples in its honor. The new seers rejected all that. When they explored stalking, they dusted off the essence of sorcery and rediscovered the goal of total freedom, which does not resemble religious goals in any way. It erased in them the fascination for the human mold, but it had a secondary effect that I have already explained to you. The wild enthusiasm of the old seers was substituted by furtive and suspicious attitudes. In the end, the effect stalking had on the Nagual parties was to betray their initial motives. In time, the goal of total freedom was reduced to rhetoric. Almost all the sorcerers of Don Juan's lineage preferred the flight to the second attention. With the exception of the Nagual, Julian Osorio, none of them wanted to be deprived of the adventure and ecstasy of visiting the dome of the Naguals, constructed of intent, located on one of the stars of the constellation of Orion. Three-pronged Naguals. The rule is final, but its design and configuration are in constant evolution. But unlike evolutionists, who view the adaptations of life as a haphazard accumulation of genetic mutations, seers know there is nothing random about the rule. They see how a command of the eagle, in the form of a wave of energy, shakes the lineages of power from time to time, producing new stages in sorcery. A more exact way of describing it is to assume that all possible variations of the rule are contained in a womb of potential. And what changes over time is the degree of knowledge the sorcerers have of that totality, and what emphasis they put on particular portions of it. Such periods of change are recurrent, and they are represented by the number 3. Why 3? Because the old Toltecs associated the number 3 with dynamics and renewal. they discovered that ternary formations based on the number 3, announce unexpected changes. The rule dictates that from time to time, a special kind of Nagual will appear in the lineages. A Nagual whose energy is not divided into 4 parts, but instead has only 3 compartments. Seers call them 3-pronged Naguals. I asked him how they were different from the others. He answered, "Their energy is volatile. They are always moving, and because of that, they find it difficult to accumulate power. From the point of view of the lineage, their composition is faulty. They will never be true Naguals. In compensation, they lack the timidity and reservation that characterize the classic Naguals, and they possess an unusual capacity to improvise and communicate. We can say that the 3-pronged Naguals are like the cuckoo birds incubated in other birds' nests. They are opportunists, but they are necessary. Unlike the Naguals of 4 points, whose freedom it is to pass unnoticed, those of 3 points are public personalities. They disclose secrets and cause fragmentation of the teachings. But without them, the lineages of power would have been extinguished a long time ago. Among the new seers, the rule is that a Nagual leaves a new party as a descendant. Some, due to their enormous energy surpluses, are able to help organizing a 2nd or 3rd generation of seers. For example, the Nagual Elias Ulloa lived long enough to create his successor's party and to have an influence on the following one. But this does not mean a fork in the lineage. All those groups were part of the same transmission line. On the other hand, the 3-pronged Nagual is authorized to transmit his knowledge radially, which does lead to a diversification of lineages. His luminous cocoon has a disintegrating effect on the group, which breaks the lineal structure of transmission and foments a desire for change and action in warriors, and an active disposition to be involved with their fellow men. Was that what happened to you? That's what happened. Due to my luminous disposition, I don't have any qualms about leaving kernels of knowledge behind wherever I go. I know that I need an enormous quantity of energy to fulfill my task, and that I can only obtain it from masses. For that reason, I am willing to broadcast the knowledge far and wide, and transform and redefine its paradigms. The portion of the rule for the 3-pronged Nagual. As you know, my teacher became aware of the rule for the 3-pronged Nagual when he tried to analyze certain anomalies in the new group. Apparently, I could not get in tune with the rest of the apprentices. Then he paid me sufficient attention to see that I masked my energy configuration. Do you mean that Don Juan's seeing had been mistaken? Of course not. What was mistaken was his looking. To see is the final form of perception. There are no appearances, so it is not possible to be deceived. However, due to the pressure that he had exerted on me for years, my energy struggled to mold itself to his. That is common among apprentices. Since he was divided into 4 compartments, I also began to manifest a similar energetic weight in my actions. Once I was able to shake off his influence, it took me almost 10 years of arduous work. We discovered something astonishing. My luminosity only had 3 compartments, It didn't correspond to an ordinary, modern person who only has two, nor to a Nagual. This discovery caused a great commotion in the group of seers, since they all saw it as a portent of profound change for the lineage. Then Don Juan went back to the tradition of his predecessors and dusted off a forgotten aspect of the rule. He told me that the election of a Nagual cannot in any way be considered as a personal whim, since it is the spirit who chooses the successor of a lineage at all times. Therefore, my energetic anomaly was part of a command. Faced with my urgent questioning, he assured me that a messenger would appear in due time and explain to me the function of my presence as a three-pronged Nagual. Years later, during a visit to one of the rooms in the National Museum of Anthropology and History, I observed a native dressed in the old-fashioned Tarahumara costume, who seemed to have the most absorbing interest in one of the exhibition pieces. He examined it from all sides and demonstrated such a total concentration that it made me curious, and I went closer to look. When he saw me, the man spoke to me and began to explain the meaning of a group of excellent, painstaking drawings sculpted into the stone. Then, while I meditated on what he had told me, I remembered Don Juan's promise and realized that this man had been an envoy from the Spirit, who had passed on to me the portion of the rule concerning the three-pronged Nagual. And what does that portion say? It affirms that just as the party has an energy matrix of the number 17, 2 Naguals, 4 female dreamers, 4 female stalkers, 4 male warriors, and 3 scouts, a lineage which is formed by a succession of parties also has a structure of power of the number 52. The eagle's command is that every 52 generations of 4-pointed Naguals, there will appear a 3-pronged Nagual, who serves as a cathartic action for the propagation of new 4-point lineages. The rule also says that the 3-pronged Naguals are destructive to the established order, because their nature is neither creative nor nurturing, and they have the tendency to enslave all those who surround them. It adds that to achieve freedom, these Naguals should do it alone, because their energy is not tuned to guide groups of warriors. Like everything in the world of energy, the block of 52 generations is divided into 2 parts. The first 26 concerning themselves with expansion and the creation of new lines. The rest oriented towards conservation and isolation. This pattern of behavior has been repeating itself millennium after millennium, so sorcerers know that it is part of the rule. As a result of the activities of a 3-pronged Nagual, the knowledge becomes widely known, and new cells of 4-point Naguals are formed. From that starting point, lineages recapture the tradition of transmitting the teachings in a lineal form. How often do 3-point Naguals appear? Approximately once per millennium. That is the age of my lineage. The task of the seers of today. Upon verifying the rule of the 3-pronged Nagual, Don Juan deduced that inevitably the time of a new breed of warriors was at hand. I have called them the modern seers. Are there any peculiarities in the luminous composition of those warriors? No, in every era, man's energy pattern has been homogeneous, so the organization of the party is the same. However, the warriors of today are experiencing a slide towards green in their luminosity, which means that they are recovering characteristics of the old seers. This is something unforeseen, although it is for sure covered by the rule. The true difference between seers of the past and those of today is in their behavior. At the moment, we are not subjected to the same repressions as in previous eras, and therefore sorcerers have fewer restrictions. Clearly, this has a purpose: popularization of the teaching. I have lived a moment of renewal. My task is to close the lineage of Don Juan with a golden key and to open up possibilities for those who come later. That is why I have said that I am the last Nagual of my lineage, not in an absolute sense, but in the sense of radical change. At this point, Carlos took a break in his presentation and reminded me of a conversation we had when we first met. At that time, I had asked him to tell me tales of power. He replied that he could not refuse what I was asking, but to hand over those stories without any directions would have been to trivialize them. I hope what you have seen during these years fulfills your expectations. I did what I could, considering your limitations as well as mine. I know you have already begun to train your dreaming double, and that guarantees that you can continue by yourself. Your double won't leave you alone until you arrive at your totality. The theoretical part is finished, and it is time to give you a last gift. The tone of Carlos's voice as he spoke these words, somewhere between familiar and solemn, made me concentrate all my attention. The final teaching says that in connection with intent, every person, whoever it may be, who approaches the Nagual, has his place inside the total context of the rule. So you are not alone. Sorcerers are expecting something from you. What? I asked, a little confused. He explained, all warriors have a task. Yours is to fulfill what the Spirit told you to do. That is your path to power. And what is that task? Well, your personal mission is something your benefactor will communicate to you someday. However, in accordance with the rule of the three-pronged Nagual, I am following a long-term strategy devised by Don Juan, which commits you to my teacher's intent. What is expected from you is that you say to those who surround you, you are free. You can fly by yourselves. You have the necessary information. What are you waiting for? Act impeccably and see how energy finds a way. Warn everyone that with the culmination of Don Juan's lineage, the knowledge is wide open. Each warrior is responsible for himself and can provide himself with the minimum opportunity, which is to organize his own party. Part 4. The world of the old seers today. With the permission of the one who has no name, I proceed with my testimony to complete this account and present the truth in its entirety. One day, very early in the morning, a phone call woke me up. It was Carlos, and frankly, he sounded bad. He said that he was in the Hotel Camino Real, in Mexico City, and that he was very sick. He added that he had been unable to sleep that night and had waited until dawn so that he could call me. I asked him how I could help him. He replied that he urgently needed a particular medicine, specially prepared for him by an herbalist in a town nearby, and asked if I would go there and get it for him. I was at his command. He gave me directions and the name of the person who would have had the potion. At that point, he made a comment which seemed odd to me, since it had nothing to do with what we were talking about. When Hernan Cortés arrived in Mexico, he gave the order to burn his ships. That was the magical act which guaranteed victory. For him, it meant he had to win or perish. He had no other option. We should bear in mind that any undertaking could be our last. He went on to say that he had a bad stomach ache, and those plants were the only thing in the world that could alleviate his pain. I didn't hesitate. Hanging up the phone, I was already on my way to Tepoztlan, a picturesque town clinging to a mountainside an hour's bus ride from Mexico City. My intention was to return with the package as soon as possible to help Carlos with his pain. Today, with the perspective I have gained after all these years, I understand what he meant when he said that any undertaking might be our last. I got off the bus and went directly to the market. Walking down the street, I could not stop marveling at the beauty of the landscape. High up on the hill above the town, one can see the pyramid of Tepozteco. It was a sunny day, and it took me just a few minutes to get to the center of town. In the market, I looked for the herbs section and asked for Don Eladio. Nobody seemed to know him, or maybe they didn't want to answer my questions. I stood there without knowing what to do, until a middle-aged gentleman with indigenous features, dressed in white with a straw hat and sandals, asked how he could help me. I replied that I was looking for Don Eladio, the herbalist, and that I came on behalf of Mr. José Cortés. His face lit up with a great smile. He extended his hand to greet me and told me he was Eladio Zamora and that he was at my service. I told him that I had come for the medicine he had ordered. He seemed not to know what I meant, but when I told him Mr. José Cortés was suffering from a strong stomach ache, he reacted as if he had remembered something. In a dramatic tone, he told me that he knew what it was about, but that unfortunately he had been unable to gather the herb in question and didn't have it available at that moment to prepare the beverage. I was alarmed, since I knew what happened to those who failed in some task which Carlos had given them. They were simply discarded. I asked Don Eladio if I could get the plant somewhere else. He shook his head. It is useless to look for it. Nobody sells it here. I insisted that there must be some place where I could find it. Seeing my despair, he told me that he could not go and get it at this moment, but maybe if I came back on the weekend. I became very nervous and told him that if he could describe the plant to me and the place where it grew, I was willing to go and look for it on my own to enable him to prepare the medicine. Upon seeing my determination, Don Eladio consented, but warned me that getting to that place where the plant grew was tiring and dangerous. "I am willing to do anything," I exclaimed. He seemed to appreciate my words, because he brought out an old botany book, and after leafing through the pages, he showed me a drawing of the plant. He said that the only place where it grew was in a narrow canyon among the hills a good distance away, and explained how to get there. I I calculated that it would take me a couple of hours to reach the place, so I said goodbye immediately and I was on my way. The beauty of those places is overwhelming. I was filled with joy at the thought that warriors of ancient ages once traveled along those barren paths, thousands of years old. Thousands of years old. The hill was further away than it had seemed. When I came to the narrow canyon, I entered it as best as I could among the tall grasses which were growing everywhere. The place in question is formed by the junction of two hills, where the water from recent rains accumulates in scattered puddles and flows in a slow, lazy stream. I looked for the plant for a long time. I finally found it. But as I bent down to pick it, a strong blow hit me on the head, and I lost consciousness. A penetrating scent woke me up. I was lying on a mat, on top of a pile of herbs. I looked around and discovered that I was in a rustic cabin. The floor was of stamped earth, and wooden beams darkened by smoke supported the tiled roof. Near a clay oven where a fire was burning sat an old woman dressed in Indian clothes. I noticed that her skin was white. Seeing that I was awake, she smiled and said, "Well, I'll be damned. Welcome back to the land of the living. For a while there, I thought you were fucked." I didn't know what to say. I tried to move and felt a searing pain in my head. My whole body ached. The old lady hurried closer to me and, in an urgent voice, ordered me not to move, since I was alive only by a miracle. Judging by the pain I felt, I could well believe my condition was serious, and did as she told me. I asked her what had happened to me. She replied that she didn't know. She thought that I had been attacked by robbers who had beaten me up and left me for dead in the hills. Pointing at the clothes I was wearing, she said I was naked when she found me. At that moment I realized that I was dressed in a white robe embroidered with hummingbirds, like the ones indigenous women use. The old lady introduced herself. She told me her name was Sylvia Magdalena, that she was a devoted herbalist, and that she was healing my injuries. She remarked that it was a stroke of luck that she had found me, laying as if thrown there in her path, bleeding and almost dead. She added that I had already spent 3 days unconscious, and that in a couple of days I could get up. Her words startled me. I wanted to get up again, but I was so weak that I fell back on the mat. I told her how shocked I was by what she told me, and, in a moaning voice, explained how I had come there in search of some herbs for a friend, but that I had failed in my task, and because of that, I would surely never see him again. Listening to my complaining, she started to laugh. I didn't understand why. Seeing my confused expression, she said, "Don't mind me. I'm just given to fits of laughter." The following days were the strangest of my life. Every day I had the opportunity to study how Doña Silvia cured her patients, who were suffering from all kinds of illnesses. When I began to recover a little from my injuries, she even asked me to help her. In that way, without really realizing it, I began working as a healer. In time, I learned everything connected to the art. She taught me how to clean people's energy and to make cures for various kinds of illnesses, as well as a lot of chiropractic techniques and an immense number of tea recipes. I soon understood that Doña Silvia Magdalena was a witch and that I had been taken on as her pupil. The simple fact of being near her was a true delight for me. The humor and drama in everything she did were magnificent, and they reminded me of Carlos's descriptions of his teachers. I spent almost 3 months on that mat. The most difficult part was in the beginning, when I could not move and the healer's assistants had to come and take me to the bathroom. That the bathroom was outside the house didn't make the situation any easier. One day when I was much better, Doña Silvia told me that at the next full moon there would be an initiation ceremony for me. I had already learned much of her world and accepted the invitation as a true honor. She added, "All I can say is that those who participate in these ceremonies are changed forever, and they can never be the same again. There is no return." As usual, I didn't understand what she meant. She always used strange expressions. It was around 9 in the evening when she asked me to come with her. We walked in the darkness for nearly an hour, until we arrived at a place where some people sat around a bonfire. When we came closer, she made a gesture indicating that I should sit down on a particular rock. The place of the meeting was near a waterfall. I could hear the roar of it and felt a humid air wafting up to where we were. The fire gave enough light to see the other participants. It was a group of 15 people, most of them young, although there were some old ones like Doña Silvia. I felt a little uncomfortable and apart, because it seemed that I was the only new one present. I'd never been to a ceremony of this kind and didn't know how to proceed or what was in store. This made me very apprehensive. The participants solemnly chanted something that I could not understand, but it filled me with an indefinable yearning. We waited for a while. A man appeared out of the darkness, dressed in the skin of a coyote. He approached the fire, dancing in a weird way. He wore the animal's head as a mask, so I could not see his face. From his manners and movements, I immediately understood that he was a sorcerer. Without saying a word, the man came up to me. With a very skilled gesture, he grabbed my left hand and pressed it against his side with his arm while turning around. I felt a sharp pain between my fingers and wanted to retract my hand, but he held it in a strong grip. When he released me, I saw that he had made a cut between my middle and ring fingers. Blood was flowing freely from the cut. I was shocked. I would have run away if I hadn't been paralyzed by terror. Then the sorcerer squeezed my hand to force out more blood and poured a little on the ground, some on the fire, and the rest in a clay vessel. Next, he ordered me to get up, take my clothes off, and keep my eyes closed. There was such a force and authority in his words that I obeyed. For a long time, the sorcerer prayed and sang around me. Then I felt him blowing on me and rubbing fragrant herbs all over my body. Finally, he cleansed me with the fire of what felt like a torch. At one point, I felt a hot and viscous substance being spilled on my head. I was intensely curious, but I didn't dare to disobey him and look. Finally, he ordered me to open my eyes. What a shock! My body was covered with blood. On a rock in front of me, I saw the headless body of a small, black male goat. I wanted to protest, but the solemnity of the situation stopped me. Then they told me to go and clean myself, so I did. I walked nude in front of them all and went to the waterfall. The water was cold, but my body was burning hot, and the cold water felt very good while it washed away the red blood covering my body. When I came out of the water, somebody was waiting for me with a towel so I could dry myself off. They gave me my clothes and I got dressed, still stunned by these unexpected events. Then I returned to take my place by the fire. Just as I sat down, those gathered in the circle began to pass around some baskets filled with peyote buttons. Each one took a button and passed the basket to the left. I thought about refusing it, but there was no reason to. I had already made my decision. So I said to myself, so what? And surrendered joyfully to participate in the ceremony. We were eating peyote and singing for most of the night. At one point, when the effect of the plant had begun to fade, the sorcerer came up to me, stopped in front of me, and took off the mask. I almost fainted with fear. I could have sworn he was the same ghost that I had seen in the crypt of the cathedral. A chill ran down my back and I wanted to scream. But the sorcerer spoke to me in a strange voice. It was very rough or dry somehow. He told me that his name was Melchor Ramos and that I was welcome among them. I didn't know what to answer. I just nodded. I was in a special state of awareness, and the clarity I enjoyed at that moment was not customary for me in my daily life. Near dawn, the assistants made an enormous spiral with embers from the fire. Don Melchor came to me and told me I should look at the spiral until Zolostok, the devil, revealed himself to me. With growing apprehension, I did what he bade me, saying to myself that all this was merely symbolic. But after a moment of staring at the embers, I became dizzy and felt as if I was falling through a tunnel towards a total blackness where I could no longer recognize myself as me. Since that night, I have never returned to the world I came from. I understand now everything that has happened to me, and I am thankful for my fabulous good luck, which brought me to these magnificent beings who are my teacher and my benefactor. The end.